Okay, so in this demo, I'm going to show you how I do my carving on my pottery. I've had people ask me over time, is it are they do I use stamps or templates, or how do I do it? And honestly, it's just all freehand. When I started carving, I started because I'd gotten bored with just a clean surface, and I wanted to do something more and stretch myself a little bit. So I started carving on things, and it's just sort of evolved. It started out being little tiny lines, and it's grown to be thicker lines with a little more space in between them, and sort of a little. There's kind of a rhyme and a reason to it in my head. I definitely have sort of certain figures and things that I use all the time, and I also try to make it evolve because I don't want to kind of get stuck in one thing. But there are definitely uh, little figures and shapes and things that I use on a regular basis. So this one I'm going to do sort of an abstract design. I'll show you how I do that. I usually just start out. This is the tool I use. It's just a little simple. I think this is a Kemper tool. I can't really see it. Yeah, it's just a simple Kemper tool. I use the little corner of it right here. And this one's going to be a little more abstract, so I'm just going to start like this. And I just make real simple lines. I try to not get too worked up about exactly what I'm doing in the moment. I just do the line and don't kind of double second guess myself in the middle of it. So having this wheel, this banding wheel helps to kind of keep it up high. I'm trying to get it at an angle where I can work comfortably and you can see it at the same time. So helps to kind of keep it up high, make it easier to work on. So I'll try to keep it where y'all can see it. But basically all I'm doing is outlining the large shapes first. I just kind of make the big lines and then I fill them in. So I'm just doing this right now. Coming down here. And I just sort of make this up as I go along. Like I said, over time, I sort of, will carve on a piece, stop, step back, take a look at it, think to myself, now what do I like about that? What don't I like about it? And then I'll go on and try to incorporate that or not into the next piece. So I'm always sort of critiquing myself where this is concerned and what do I like, what do I want to change, that kind of thing. So, and I always carve on them when they're leather hard. Right now it's leather hard, so it's a fabulous consistency to carve on. It makes everything very neat and tidy. You notice that I'm not getting like little burrs and things on it. That's because the consistency of the clay is perfect to work on right now. So I'm just doing this, doing that. So I've done, as you can see, I've kind of done this uninterrupted line all the way around like that. And then what I'm going to do, you can kind of see it goes all the way around. Then I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to go back through and do a complementary line like this. I'm not going to come all the way down. As you can see, I carved in a line here and here. That gives me a framework to work inside. It just kind of helps to give me some parameters. When I first started doing this, I just did it weird and randomly, and I didn't like it. I thought it looked messy and unintentional. It wasn't organized, and I wanted it to be more organized. So that's kind of what this has grown out of. So I'm kind of doing that. And this one I kind of messed up. It's going to have to come down to the bottom. But life will go on. And then I have to hold, it's easier to hold this at this angle, this particular one. So I'm just sort of doing a mirror, in a way, a mirror image of what I just did on the bottom. But I'm just going around the top now and doing this. And what I'm doing, I have a little game I play with myself, is I like to have this little uninterrupted line or pathway that goes all the way around the piece. That's something I do in some of my, when I do something like this, it's a little more abstract. If you're familiar with, there's that famous passageway, that hallway in Florence that was, I think, I'm probably horribly wrong, but I think it was designed for the Medici so they could travel around Florence without having to actually go out on the street. And I'm not sure where it begins and ends, but apparently it goes throughout the city, and you can see it, parts of it, around the city, and in some very prominent photographs of the Arno and things like that. And now I think parts of it are open. It's part of a museum now, and I think parts of it are open to the public, so you can go see it. But so I think of it that way. It's like that little hallway that goes through all the way through Florence. I like to have a little uninterrupted line. So you can see that here. If I revolve this, you can see how I'm doing that. You can see that little uninterrupted line that goes all the way through. So then what I do is I just keep filling in. So now I fill this in, and I just start doing that and that and do that. And then for me, what's interesting is I start getting these really interesting shapes in between the cuts. Like, I guess maybe the negative space is what you could call it, but like here and there, I think that looks really cool. So I'm gonna kind of go and repeat that other places, because I love that shape. So I'm doing this. I'm going to do something similar right there. And then I do that. And for me, it all becomes about sort of the shapes that emerge in between the lines that I'm making. To me, that's the interesting part. And like, you could look at this right here and say, oh, that's just a cut with your tool. I'll hold this up close. That's just a cut with your tool. But for me, what becomes interesting about it is that it goes here and up and over and down. That whole thing is fascinating to me and really interesting. And so that's what I get excited about and interested about. So when after I finish carving on this and I stop and look at it and be like, oh, isn't that interesting? Well, I'll have to remember that and repeat it in other pieces and do different things with it. So it's a nice way to sort of let your work evolve and do kind of do interesting things and not feel like you're getting stuck. You hear about artists that are, especially famous, artists that become famous for one specific thing, and then they get stuck for the next 40 years doing that one specific thing because that's what their public wants or their customers, and they kind of get stale with it. So I'm glad that that's something I try not to let happen. I always keep that in my forefront of my mind. So, but I just keep doing this and going through and filling in the blank spaces, doing that. Fill that in. Fill that in. And that's all of that. That's the bottom part. And then I turn it around, and again, this clay is a really good consistency, so it's not making any burrs or anything as I go along. So now I'm going to do this to the other side. This side always gets a little tougher. I always have to pick it up and hold it sometimes. And I'm just, like I said, I'm just filling in the stuff. I'm not trying to make tiny lines. I'm just trying to kind of fill in any blank spots. Like that's a little blank spot, so I'm filling that in. Then I'm going over here. My hand's probably in the way the whole time. that. You can see how I did that. That. And honestly, I may have already said this, but one of the reasons I started doing these big lines was that I was just getting bored. This can feel tedious, or at least in the beginning it did. In part because I was making tiny little lines. And it wasn't fun, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it yet, and all of that. Once I started making the bigger lines, not only did it go quicker, but I felt like there was more movement. It was more sort of a dramatic look. The shapes became more interesting because the shapes were bigger and more defined, which was nice. It just opened everything up. So, and I've often said I do pottery because I feel like I have a hard time being a patient person, and my brain is always working. So this is kind of a nice way to. It forces me to slow down. Although throwing on the wheel is a little bit of instant gratification in that you have a form finished, a basic form finished in a relatively short amount of time, but the rest of this takes a while. You're kind of at the mercy of the clay and it drying and firing and all of that. So this is basically, as you can see, is basically done. I always go all the way around it and take a look at it and make sure there aren't any weird little spots that I feel like I need to put in a little divot or something, or there's like a spot that's a little too full or a little too bare. This one, there's here and there. I'm going to do a little spot there and a little spot there. Of course, if I do that, it means I have to do it other places. Little spot there. Little spot there. You can see where I did that. See, because then you have to start mirroring them. So I did that. So not too many. I should do one right there. Oops, come on. Make sure I get a good. There we go. To see if there's anything else like any other spots. No, that's pretty good. So that's it for this one. So I will